Is there a spy in your backyard? He's watching me, isn't he? Worse yet, does your spy in your backyard have a license to kill? It's another BrainScratch. And we're going to be talking all about smart meters. Are they safe? Are they ethical? Is there more to this story? Let's get to the research. Hello, Brain Scratchers. We're back and we're here to talk about smart meters. Now, just want to give a quick shout out to a new friend of mine, Heather Lane, who kind of helped bring me kind of into this topic, or more towards this topic. She has a pretty interesting story. It seems like she is a part of a very small part of the population that are extremely sensitive to electrical interference. This has quite honestly wreaked some havoc in her life. She really can't live near very strong electrical impulses, and this has caused her to go as far as moving away from the city she used to be in, and nowadays she is actually living in a tent. That's not an uncommon story. We're going to get to some information about this a little bit later, but it is a highly controversial topic. There is a lot of science attempting to refute that this is a real phenomenon. As a matter of fact, the Wikipedia article on it we're also going to touch on a little bit later, but it does seem extremely real for a pretty good percentage of our population. And some people like Heather consider herself the canary in the coal mine, just that she is effectively very sensitive to this for some reason, but it's pointing to a larger issue that is going to affect all of us. She was featured on In Other News, which is a radio and web broadcast that I was also featured on. So I'm going to have a link down below so you can check out her full story and hear it straight from her mouth. So outside of that, once I started looking into this topic, there was one part of it in particular that struck me personally, and that is the topic of smart meters. And it struck me personally because I remember receiving the literature talking about this installation of the smart meter, and we're just going to plop it into your backyard, and there's going to be all these wonderful benefits and features. And then quite honestly, I haven't even thought about it again. And once I started looking into Heather's materials, it seemed like smart meters were a bit of a topic, and then I went and did just a few simple searches, and you can do this for yourself. Just open up Google or open up YouTube and just search on the term smart meter, and you will see this topic is extremely controversial. There has been literally communities that are trying to get legislation passed to stop the rollout of this. There have been private citizens that are literally damaging their smart meters in an attempt to get rid of them and go back to their old analog meters. They're creating all kinds of special devices for the smart meters to try to contain the radiation. And that's part of the story of why people think they're dangerous. Essentially, the smart meter is kind of like its own cell phone. It is it's been stamped by the FCC. It is a transmissions device. So this is something that is literally beaming out a signal through your backyard or through your home. But honestly, for how I see it working, it's more like it's sapping your backyard because it's trying to get to your neighbors. And we'll talk more about that here also. But what are the benefits of the smart meter? Essentially, the only benefit I can find is it means that an employee of the electrical company doesn't have to come by your house to check your meter. Outside of that, they say that other stated benefits are they can now analyze your house to see how you're using electricity, and that has some privacy advocates up in arms because it's kind of like, now you have this service that you've paid for. You pay for electricity. You don't pay for electricity to be used a specific way that may or may not jive with the beliefs of other people. And now the data is essentially being collected where the other people can start to dictate and possibly change rates or even enforce policies. It's even going as far as suggesting that they can disable certain types of electrical frequencies from being used. So If you imagine everything in your house has its own electrical signature, that's basically how these smart meters are tracking what's being used. And that means that they can tell if your air conditioner is kicking on versus if your microwave is being used. They can tell if your Xbox One is being fired up a lot more than your treadmill. There are definite privacy concerns around that, particularly because they are using a wireless communication method. And we all know that cell phones are hackable. The NSA already has its fingers into all types of information owned by these major companies. And from what I can see, the electrical company is using some third-party companies, so I'm pretty sure that that data is now being made available to the NSA. And if you know anything about data aggregation, this could be used to once again draw a even much more clear picture about you now inside the confines of your home. This has gone beyond just tracking where you are when you take your cell phone somewhere, how often you use Twitter while you're at the park. This has now become, this person apparently sits in their office for 8 hours a day. We can tell because their computer shows a bunch of electrical usage. The fan in their office is on for those 8 hours. Then they go to their living room and we can tell because the television gets popped on. They go to the kitchen for approximately 30 minutes a day. We can tell because of the microwave usage, their toaster oven's usage, the refrigerator door, the refrigerator kicking on from the door being opened and closed. So once you start considering how much people can track, not to mention if you're home or not, which is probably the biggest thing that I'm concerned of in terms of a violation, because if hackers were to get that information, they could now put together a relatively easy to understand blueprint of your daily life when you're home and when you're not, and that could be ultimately dangerous for committing a crime. So do yourself a favor, just search on the term smart meters and you'll see it goes literally all over the board. And there are a couple different areas of concern. The privacy concerns, like I just mentioned, but also the health concerns, and that's where the information gets a lot fuzzier. Now, there are people that swear they can actually detect the feeling. It literally impacts them when they're close to the meter. There's also a very good film called Take Back Your Power, which I'm going to show you a link to at the end of all this, which has some pretty compelling testimony from people that have been affected by this. There is also apparently a very small number of these meters that have caught fire. They've essentially exploded for some reason. Now, the official word from the power companies is those meters were damaged in some way that led to those explosions, like maybe the person that was living at the house, took a hatchet to it or something. They are definitely not fessing up for ownership of any problem that would cause those meters to explode. However, there's a lot of questions about this technology because it was kind of rushed out. It was put out in mass force. I believe they used contractors for a lot of it, which always raises a flag for me because you get that third-party kind of handoff. They don't know what they're doing. Let them go install it, and we'll reap the benefits. So definitely a lot of angles on this case to be aware of. There are all kinds of devices you can buy. This video here, this guy's showing an actual cage that he puts around the smart meter, and they have EMF frequency detectors that they can use, so you can see exactly how much electromagnetic frequency is being kicked off of that smart meter. And when they put this stainless steel kind of cage around it, they can see that they contain over 95% of those emissions. And that's part of the story here too that gets a little interesting, because according to the power companies, these things are only transmitting for a few minutes a day. Essentially, the smart meter keeps track of all this information that's going on in the house and then just has to talk to the network for a few minutes daily. And there's some big questions about if that's true or not. This is from EmWatch.com. And speaking specifically to that, utility officials started off by suggesting that a smart meter transmission would only take place once every 4 hours or so. But in many instances, it happens much more frequently than that, up to thousands of times a day. Now, I tried to look for some information to validate that, and I did find some information that alludes to that fact. This is from PG&E.com, and PG&E is actually one of the big power providers here in the United States. This is a page that is all about the smart meter and how it works. And specifically on this page, the system uses RF mesh technology, which allows meters and other sensing devices to securely route data via nearby meters and relay devices, creating a mesh of network coverage. Now, I am quite familiar with mesh networks. This is not a new technology. This is decades and decades old. And to understand what a mesh network is, essentially you can think of a network as being one terminal here, connected by a cable, and another terminal over here. Well, a mesh network is not connected by a cable. Essentially, these meters are different nodes, and you can have meters all over the place, and they determine how to route the information to the receiving party, but they're jumping from meter to meter to meter. So what this means is that little meter that I showed you at the beginning of this video that's in my backyard is also a router. It is not only transmitting my information, it's likely transmitting the information of my neighbors. I'm basically one stop on that communication path of taking that information back to the electric company. And if that is true, that sucker is sending information constantly, all day long. If it didn't, you would have networks literally overloaded because you were trying to purge and send all that information within a few minutes every night, as according to what some of these power companies say. And I can tell you that is clearly not the case. We already know that's not the case because there's people with EMF readers that can gauge and see that these smart meters are literally sapping all day long, and they're shooting into your backyard. Now, I've read some claims about, well, it's not that big of a deal, it's basically equivalent to a cell phone. These meters are installed on the outside of your house, so it's not really going to affect anybody. That is kind of a silly thought to me. You're telling me just because of the location of the meter being outside of my house that it's not likely to affect someone? I don't believe these walls are lead. I don't think they're stopping these pulses from coming right through. And on the other side of that wall, that's where my wife sits for 8 to 10 hours a day to do her job. So that literally has me concerned. Outside of that, if you have children, do they play in the backyard? Is it possible that they're playing around this device while it's sapping the crap out of your backyard with these signals? It's kind of silly. Not only that, because of the mesh network that I've described to you, that means that my neighbors, their communications have to be reaching into my backyard too. So you have now, literally house by house, you've increased how much of these wavelengths are being sent literally throughout the whole neighborhood. And there is a clear difference that I see in people that are purchasing an item like a cell phone, knowing the risks of it, because if you haven't read up on the risks of it, you probably should. I mean, they're basically right now cell phones are kind of in the territory that cigarettes used to be in, where there's a bunch of pseudoscience to contradict that they really affect people. But if you look into the terms and conditions, yeah, be sure to keep that iPhone, almost an inch away from you at all times, which doesn't make any sense. If you use an iPhone, it's going to be in your pocket, which is closer than an inch to you, or it's going to be up on your head, which is much closer than an inch to you. So there's a lot of information that needs to be scrutinized, needs to be looked at, but let's look at it through the lens of history and realize that big companies are very good at subduing some of this information, paying for supposedly independent studies to show their story. It's just, I really think we have to have a bit of a critical eye towards this, even outside of the privacy concerns. But I can tell you the privacy concerns are huge and should have a strongly critical eye towards it. Now, the other curious thing about them using a wireless mesh network, which I believe is kind of silly actually, is why are you exposing that information and sending it wirelessly when every house that's connected to your electrical grid is literally connected to it by wires? It would be much more secure if they would use their own infrastructure that's already in place and already paid for and literally kick the communication of that data back over their own wired network. And honestly, that kind of raises a couple of questions with me, just in terms of not really having a good sense of what their business is truly aiming for in using wireless communications. There's no reason for it. Every house that touches their network is on wire. Wire that could easily be used for communications. There was devices, 2 decades ago, that you could use for routing just your internet access throughout your house using your existing electrical cables. So I don't think that there is any technical reason that they can't use their own wired infrastructure and keep that data a lot more safe. But instead they're blasting it through the air and to a third-party network who is likely some type of cellular provider. I'd be very surprised if it's not one of the major cellular providers that's catching this information at some point and then routing it back to the electric company. So just another question that I can't quite find an answer to. As a matter of fact, here is an article from darkreading.com, and I believe this is just from last year. Yep, October 2014. Smart meter hack shuts off the lights. So you've got, basically there are these black hat events where hackers get together. You might have heard of one recently where guys have taken over a car and they were able to stop the engine and force it to go into downshifting and turn up the radio and do all this stuff literally from their laptop while someone else was driving the car. These black hat conferences are used to essentially find these exploits before they become large problems, and we can see that, according to this article, 2 guys were revealing at the Black Hat Europe in Amsterdam that they have already reverse engineered smart meters and found blatant security weaknesses that allowed them to commandeer the devices, shut down power, or even perform electricity usage fraud. So basically all these great reasons that they had for installing the devices, we're now seeing the side effects of that in terms of the hacker community and what they can do. And there's another piece of little common sense that's just kind of nudging me around this too. The old analog meters were literally a mechanical device. You could watch that dial spin on its own. These are electric. Who's paying for that? Oh, wait, let me push this finger this way. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that we are paying for the electricity that's being used to essentially provide the electric company with their own data. Now, I haven't seen anything that says that they figured out some way to omit that charge and that they're not charging the house for it. And as a matter of fact, if you watch the documentary Take Back Your Power, it seems to suggest that people's electrical bills are actually climbing once the smart meters are installed, which would make sense to me if all of a sudden there was another Wi-Fi or cell phone type device on my house that was broadcasting over and over all day long, every day of the year. So it really comes down to a question of, first of all, privacy. Do you care about your privacy? Do you care about that type of information being collected on you and being used by third parties? We already know that it's being routed through a third party. I'm fairly certain the electrical companies are going to be selling this information possibly to manufacturers. They could tell GE, hey, GE, we've noticed that people with this certain refrigerator, they consume less power, so we're going to give you guys a special stamp. I mean, there are definite ways that you could collect and use that information for good, but there are also ways that it could be used badly. But then there is the question of health. And once again, I'm just going to urge you, really take the time and check out Take Back Your Power. It's won all kinds of awards. It's a pretty good documentary. It's not the most exciting thing you're ever going to see, but to see the real stories of people that were affected by this, women that were arrested for not allowing the electrical people onto their property to install the meter. There's even a case in that movie where a man is watching an employee of, I don't think it's the electric company, I think it's a third party that they hired, but this person literally broke into his basement to get to his meter, and he's sitting there with a camera recording the whole thing. It's pretty ridiculous the lengths that have been gone to support this initiative. And ultimately, when you look at the information that they're promising the government, which is part of why this has been able to roll out so quickly, they're only looking at potentially a 4% reduction in electrical usage by 2030. And if you know anything about aggregated data and standards of deviation, 4% is hardly even measurable. I mean, you could have a report that reflects a 2 to 3% discrepancy just by the nature of the report being constructed improperly. 4% is nothing. And outside of that, if you watch Take Back Your Power, you're going to see a bunch of testimony of people that were charged literally a lot more, and all of a sudden it seems like their bill's going through the roof and they're not sure why. But back to the safety of it. There is an article on Wikipedia. As usual, I'm going to have all these links in the description box below so you can check it for yourself. And this article is on electromagnetic hypersensitivity. The reported symptoms of EHS include headache, fatigue, stress, sleep disturbances, skin symptoms like prickling, burning sensations and rashes, pain and ache in muscles, and many other health problems. Whatever their cause, EHS symptoms are a real and sometimes disabling problem for the affected person. However, there is no scientific basis to link EHS symptoms to electromagnetic field exposure. The majority of provocation trials to date have found that self-described sufferers of electromagnetic hypersensitivity are unable to distinguish between exposure to real and fake electromagnetic fields, and it is not recognized as a medical condition by the medical or scientific communities. Since a systemic review in 2005 showing no convincing scientific evidence for it being caused by electromagnetic fields, several double-blind experiments have been published, each of which has suggested that people who report electromagnetic hypersensitivity are unable to detect the presence of electromagnetic fields and are as likely to report ill health following a sham exposure as they are following exposure to genuine electromagnetic fields, suggesting the cause to be the nocebo effect. Now, once again, as I stated before, a lot of these studies are usually funded by the company trying to disprove them, and you have to look at them with a bit of a critical eye. And there is also something to be said for prolonged exposure. There are actually doctors that are working with patients of these issues, and they are noting that it does seem to take a certain amount of prolonged exposure before this happens. Although if you check out that great documentary, I'm going to plug it one more time, Take Back Your Power, you will see that you can at least prove that cells are being affected by these frequencies. Now, does that mean that it's making people sick? Not necessarily. However, I do think that it's enough that it should be looked into more, and hopefully more of the scientific community can get in there to either prove or disprove this. And in either case, find a way to help these people that are being affected by it, even if it is a nocebo effect, even if it is some type of emotional disorder that is being drummed up around the stress of having that item attached to their house. That is still a very real and viable problem, and something that should be addressed by people that truly care about others. Not that that would be your electric company, but someone out there should. Around investigating all this, I did also find something called the Taos Hum. And the Taos Hum was featured on Unsolved Mysteries. It's also featured on Live Science's Top 10 Unexplained Phenomena. As a matter of fact, in the X-Files, in a 1998 episode, Mulder speculates that extremely low-frequency radio waves may be behind the so-called Taos Hum. Basically, it's a hum that only, I believe, 2% of the population can detect. This one is called the Taos Hum, but there is another location. The Bristol Hum is another place where a hum can be heard, and apparently it's very uncomfortable for the people that can hear it. This article from Wikipedia also goes into the point of, is this potentially just something that is happening with the people specifically, but it says that it can't account for how when the people are removed from these locations, from Bristol and Taos, that they don't hear that hum. So it does seem to be regionalized for some reason. And is Mulder right? Is it low frequency radio waves? I have no idea. But there's a lot of information that you can look into around this. As I said, it's highly controversial. There's even aspects of this that touch upon autism. There's one doctor in particular that thinks because of the amount of radio waves and basically how much we are being sapped with them now, if you compare that to the number of autism cases, which are rising constantly, he thinks that he sees a correlation there. But you know, it's pretty tough to substantiate that type of information without major studies, and I don't think that we're seeing major studies come to this. So once again, just a quick shout out to my new friend Heather, and I wanted to thank her for sharing her story, first of all, being brave enough to do that with all this type of controversy. I'm sure that she's heard a lot of negative comments around this, but she has also done a great service in terms of putting information together at ignoranceanddenial.org. And if you visit this website, you'll find all kinds of links to other information about smart meters, but also about other types of electromagnetic sensitivity. It's really a good service. And I have to wonder, Heather, in your tent, do you have a laptop, or how are you watching BrainScratch, and how are you updating this website? I know that I spoke to her recently, and she said that her condition has now gotten to a point where she's able to deal with electronic devices for short periods of time. So I do think that she is getting to a computer at some point to make this service, but it does raise the question. And finally, takebackyourpower.net, which you can come here and first of all see how acclaimed this movie is. It won a bunch of great awards for being an independent film. I thought it was very cool. Filmmaker has a good kind of level-headed approach to all of this. And what's interesting is I had done a bunch of research for this episode first, and then I watched this movie. And this movie really included most of the highlights from all the research that I had done before. So if you want kind of a quick dive into all of the high points about this, I highly recommend this movie. It even goes a bit farther than just the smart meters and talks a bit about a case with a cell phone tower at San Diego State University, which is really, really troubling. And maybe we'll even do a BrainScratch on at some point. But a very good film. You can stream it from the website here. You can buy a DVD copy here. But it is also available to be viewed on YouTube. And I don't believe it's pirated there, because at the end of the film he actually encourages his audience to share the information on the internet. So I don't feel terrible, but if you want to support the cause, I'd say come here and pay the $4 to stream it. If you just want the information, I think that was his intent. He's pretty clear about it at the end of the movie, and from what I can tell, that video is, you know, in thousands of views, and it's not been taken down or anything. So I do think that it's a legit posting. Just do a YouTube search for "Take Back Your Power" full documentary, and you should be able to watch it. So you tell me, Brain Scratchers, what's going on with this? Do you know someone that might have been affected by this type of sensitivity? Do you have some stories about smart meters blowing up or providing strange occurrences for you or your family members? Please drop it in the comments below. I'll be sure to check them out and get back to you. And I hope you're all having a great week. I look forward to catching you on the next show on Geek and Dorks, a YouTube channel. Take care.